One, on the personnel security side, yes, absolutely, there are cultural sensitivities. Nobody wants to be labeled as racist. China is the CCP rather is thinking very strategically, absolutely knows that, and absolutely goes after its own diaspora, which not only do they ideologically consider to be part of, the motherland,
Greater China, yeah.
rightfully under their control, but also they are fully aware that we are culturally sensitive to these things and don't want to press on these issues, and also that there are legal restrictions preventing companies from not hiring on this.
Incredible.
Actually, I just want to first circle back to the point about, why are the other whistleblowers not sort of talking about this either?
Yeah.
There is a psychological dimension to this that's really important. When you're sitting down at the lunch table and looking across from you and you see Ming, you see your coworker, right? You see your coworker and you don't see a Chinese spy. You've talked to this coworker for years. Yeah. Your coworker, by the way, often is actually a patriot. Like the Ming is a patriot. That's the problem. See, the Chinese surveillance espionage state has mechanisms available to it to coerce, right? This is a coercion system.
This is Daniel Fagelli. You're tuned into The Trajectory, and this is our second episode on U.S.-China AGI Relations. Our first episode was with Jack Shanahan, the first director of the Joint AI Center for the United States Department of Defense. Our guests this week are Jeremie and Ed Harris. For those of you who follow Joe Rogan, they've been on Rogan's show a couple times talking about sort of the great AGI race between the U.S. and China. For that audience, they are speaking with sort of laypersons who are probably new to some of these concepts. For this audience, they are speaking to folks that are much more familiar already with artificial general intelligence risk. And in this episode, we go very, very deep with them in topics that were nowhere near even scratched in terms of the surface on Rogan's show. Again, different audience, different focus, but I was excited to go deep. I think it is not a stretch to say that the Harris brothers probably have a more robust conception of the real politic of AGI competition between the US and China than anyone I've ever spoken to. And in this episode, we unpack some of the more deep and sort of tough to untangle tensions there, including what happens if we somehow solve international coordination, including the fact that there are Chinese nationals embedded in the major AGI labs, and including many other somewhat uncouth and uncomfortable topics. So if you're willing to deal with uncouth and uncomfortable topics, buckle up and tune in for the rest of this episode. I'll save my ideas for the end of this episode. Without further ado, Jeremie and Ed Harris here in The Trajectory. So Ed and Jeremie, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us, Dan. It's great to be on.
Absolutely. I'm really excited to dive in. I think that the dynamic of the US-AI-China race, the AGI race specifically, people are tertiarily aware of it. Almost no one has gone to the level of depth that you guys have in terms of research, in terms of figuring out the real state of affairs. So I want to kind of dive into, I open generally with, hey, what should people know about the general dynamic between the US and China? But we agreed kind of before the recording here, there's a few core things that you guys would respond to that with that we really need to unpack. And one of these is around how cooperation with China is just not really on the table. That's a shocking stance. Some people are like, hey, we really should have at least track 2 dialogues, or, hey, there could be a way to have a CERN for AI. Others are very much of the other opinion. Talk to me, guys, about what is the feedback you got where it's like, there's nothing we can do? It's almost fatalistic, but where's it come from? Lay it on me.
Yeah, well, to start, I wouldn't quite go so far as to say, absolutely fatalistic. It's kind of one of these never say never things, and certainly we should be having track 2 dialogues and trying to talk, if only because you may potentially see a change of attitude over there. We can never be sure, right, what the future holds. So that's just kind of to start. Having said that, the national security folks that we have engaged with, primarily on kind of the intelligence community side, who are observing what's going on in China and the attitudes generally and the strategic approach that China is taking in essentially engaging in full spectrum warfare against U.S. interests. There is a view there that engaging on this level and trusting that agreements will be held to from that corner is naive to the point of basically not you basically disqualify yourself from the conversation. And I'm in this I'm basically just kind of transmitting what we have
heard from others.
Yeah.
There is a dimension of this too that's like there's a reason that that's the case, right? So you look at China and how they've engaged internationally. Like, what is the 9-dashed line, if not a complete repudiation of any form of international law that China itself claims to hold sacred, right? If you look at the way the Chinese interact with international law, it's everything about the UN, everything about ensuring everyone's territorial sovereignty is respected. Of course, to them, that includes Taiwan. But even if you were to grant that, where the hell did the 9-dashed line come from? Apart from that, you've got Hong Kong, obviously. You've got COVID-19, case after case after case.
Yeah, and the nuclear buildup. So one of the things that you see, right, is China is on track for having, I think it's something like 1,000 thermonuclear warheads by 2035. We can see that those those silos are under construction. You can see in satellite that they are actively working really hard to build these silos. When U.S. officials try to broach the topic that, hey, it looks like you guys are building a nuclear arsenal to rival that of the two nuclear superpowers that are already holding the world at risk of total annihilation, they will simply not acknowledge and not talk about it in any space. And at the same time, we've seen in the last year that there is essentially a gigantic bunker under construction outside of Beijing that can hold the equivalent of 10 Pentagons. And it's believed to be a continuity of government or continuity of leadership infrastructure in the event of an extreme scenario happening. So yeah, you can listen to what folks say, but at a certain point, you have to just look and see what they are doing.
Yeah, well, there's so much to poke into here. Because I'm with you that sort of track 2 feels remarkably. It should be primarily harmless. I mean, it's not like in track 2, it's like, here's OpenAI's latest XY, right? It's like we're not exchanging information of that kind at that point. But there are obviously academic thinkers and research thinkers, maybe even some people in the apparatus who are like not super eager for like the sand god race of doom and who would like to coordinate. Like Shanahan, who opened this series, is no naive fella about like, well, China will shake hands and we'll be right. He's not in that boat, but he's also very much in like we should be knitting together some version of positive futures, even given our not shared culture as much as we can. Yeah. And so it sounds like you guys would advocate for that. So that's interesting just to see where you stand. But in terms of like,
we should try everything that has a slight chance of working.
Totally. So, and track 2, I think, is part of that. Certainly, something that seems important. And by the way, for anybody tuned in, I mean, I'm an American. I would certainly prefer to live under, a state wielding AGI that was not Maoist versus Maoist. I actually big China fan, just not big like CCP fan. Like Tang Dynasty is like super fucking cool. Like there's just a lot over there that's awesome. But it's like, God, they had to destroy the 4 olds and they had to do all this stuff, and now they got to be all this authoritarian thing. But with all that said, like, the things we shouldn't expect cooperation on. So like dialogue's great, but let me just put some stuff on the table. You guys shoot down what you want to shoot down. So one would be like, hey, there's this idea. Maybe there'd be a CERN for AI and like certain kinds of AI development would only happen in this space. Yeah. Like, okay, that's total bunk. Like they're just going to take it all and just build their own super sand god. None of it's going to stay there. Another thing might be like, hey, we're going to have an international transparency as we do with nukes for, certain size data centers, use of certain hardware, whatever the case may be, and make sure that there's some kind of a reference and monitoring. We have an interview that's not live at the time of us speaking right now with Irakli Barids of the United Nations, who's a big part of like the chemical weapons stuff, who kind of like talked about like how those things start to come together internationally, what they look like. Obviously, it's much harder to govern this stuff than chemical weapons, and it's much more dual use than chemical weapons are. but like there's those kind of things. Would you say like, yeah, that whole panoply of ideas, honestly, people need to be shutting it down and not planning on it to work at all? Is this safe to assume, or like what would be the nuance you would add?
So there are a couple of different, I'll start with the CERN for AI bit. Obviously that one's been floated a lot. Bengio's a fan.
Bengio, yes.
People are on board. Yeah. So love the concept in an ideal world. That is how you would do it in an ideal world. Of course it is, right? Of course it is. The problem is that when you create a CERN for AI, you are creating a perfect intelligence target for adversary espionage. There is, like, based on everything we know, and we've gone extremely deep with some of the most exquisite teams on planet Earth working on sabotage, espionage, nation state level IP. Like, these are folks who, without getting into too far into the specific backgrounds, these are like tier 1 special forces. So meaning SEAL Team 6, meaning Delta, also intelligence professionals, like at the highest levels of their game. The reason, by the way, that I mentioned the special operations, some people sometimes wonder, they think, oh, these are just the guys who go out and blow things up.
Exactly. I think this is the assumption. It's like, okay, so they really know how to use a sniper rifle, but go talk a little bit more robustly here about what they do.
The special ops skill set is a essentially all-encompassing. I mean, if you think about doing warfare
at the tier 1 level. Sorry, I just want to draw that.
Got it. At tier 1 level. Okay.
In 2025, if you want to go into a denied environment where, you know, the Russians have, you know, a bunch of jamming stuff up and you can't fly normal drones in there, and at the same time they're hunting for you using their own drones, there are like all kinds of signals, intelligence signals that are going back and forth. You basically have to be like a radio frequency guru. You have to be a physical access guru. You have to be like, how do I find way, like use cyber tools? It's the intersection of all these things at such an exquisite level of game that no one else gets to touch, because really until you do the thing with your bare hands, you don't know how the system's going to respond. Yeah. So these are the folks that we work with. These are like the most serious folks on planet Earth doing exactly this right now. And when you talk to them about this idea that you're going to have a bunch of people from a bunch of different countries, all well-meaning, and they're going to get together and do the AGI thing, but don't worry, we're going to have somehow, secured enclaves? We're going to have some information that the Chinese have, some that we don't. Like, how is that? There's really no configuration of this that responds to reality's call to test us. There's no kind of, no clear way that actually works without leaking, essentially.
Which is not to say that no part of that idea can be salvaged. And in fact, it's not even to say that we shouldn't also pursue the possibility of this idea. Because the thing is, we may develop technologies that change the picture. There's a chance, right? There's a chance. But it's a small chance, and we should not, and in fact cannot and will not, put all our eggs in that one basket. But some of the stuff that has come from that ecosystem, such as the FlexHeg, so this is flexible hardware-enabled guarantees, the idea of building a compute stack that by its nature and by design can be verified through various forms of encryption and physical hardening. There are some challenges even with that, and it probably cannot be implemented as currently envisioned. But there are many, many things that are coming out of that FlexHeg approach, which is tied to this idea of CERN for AI, which will be almost certainly extremely valuable in the near and midterm future for additional levels of verification, even for the kind of bilateral deals that are being envisioned right now by the Trump administration and that do potentially increase security and robustness to some level.
If you can also, if you can carve out capabilities somehow from alignment, which that's a thorny question and would take a lot of work. But if you could, right? Yeah. That would be an interesting option for a CERN for AI type situation. If it's possible for you to co-develop, for example, add-ons that just help you with loss of control scenarios. Like, that's something everybody has an incentive to pursue.
Yeah.
But again, it's like, and that's something we'd be full steam ahead on. Go do that. And if you ever figure that out and you can get really good evidence that that's something we can box out, why would we leave that on the table? The challenge with the CERN for AI bit, though, is it is a bit of a one-way door. Once you do it, you can't undo it. And if you set it up wrong, and it seems like there are far, far more ways to set it up wrong at the operational level, if not at the strategic, then there's no going back.
So you're framing initially here of like, hey, in an ideal world, that would be great. We're not in an ideal world. I think that's exactly what we should be talking about. Let's talk about the not ideal world. It does seem to me like most free market democracies, at the OECD, they're referred to as like-minded nations, a very friendly way of saying it, which is basically like you can worship stuff and say things and no one breaks your legs. Like that's kind of what it means. That's what like-minded nations means at the OECD. Yep. So like it doesn't feel like there's a lot of risk from any of them bad boys, but like it does seem like it is a non-ideal authoritarian scenario and just like norms around power that are just don't make certain kinds of cooperation viable. Closing note on this as we get into the next point about IP theft, which is going to be very important. Like, are there, track 2, cool, let's do it. Academics, people that used to be in government, some people that are in government, just talk about what could we get along with? What are ideas worth floating? There's bound to be some ideas that bubble up where it's like, even in a non-ideal world, actually, that could probably be a force against accelerating arms races, whatever. What are the kinds of, clearly we're going to probably birth something we cannot control here. Like some degree of global coordination feels really fucking important to make that happen. What are there any like small ideas where like, yep, can't really work with them, trust is nowhere, yada yada, but like I don't know, these things still seems viable. Like, are there little drips there so that people can understand kind of your position?
Yeah. So one thing that you could imagine collaborating on is some kind of non-proliferation regime for non-state or kind of sub-state actors for GPUs. So it's looking like China is developing its own domestic supply chain for the Ascend chips. They're not at Western standard yet, but they're leaning into their advantages. So while they're not up to our standard in terms of energy efficiency, they also just have a lot of energy. So they can just build a crap ton of chips and get around it that way. But they currently have, of course, too few chips to meet their domestic demand. So they're not yet selling into the international markets, which means there is potentially a deal that can be struck here where the United States has the capability to sell to international markets. And if it is determined that we're at a point where, a big enough cluster of GPUs is a high risk concentration, then it costs China very little at this stage to agree to some non-proliferation measures, while we can lead on the same thing.
The related piece here too is, and this is, Ed alluded to it on the FlexEgg side, right? There's a related set of technologies around tracking chips, location tracking, tamper-proof remote shutdown, tamper-proof monitoring.
You guys know Lucid AI and that kind of ecosystem?
Yeah,
you guys know Christian?
Sure do.
Yeah. Christian's got a worthy successor episode that's in the hopper, and he's going to be. Yeah, we're doing a worthy successor physical event in San Francisco in 2 weeks or something like that, and he's a real big ally in that regard, but he's one of the few that's... Yeah, go ahead.
Can you send us the date and time of that event?
Absolutely. Look, I know you guys are like family men and, you're on like, you're flying to Austin for Rogan and all this stuff, so I'm not going to bug you. But yes, offline, I'll pop you guys the deets, all right? So
we're going to be in SF in 2 weeks.
Yeah. Whoa, all right. Well, that could be... that would make my day. Sorry, audience. We're connecting with the guest for 2 minutes. We're going to get right back into our programming. But yeah, so Christian, one of the few that's working on that, it sounds like you guys see that as a potentially viable path. What might that look like, Jeremie?
Well, it's an ingredient, right? So
yes, one of many.
Think about the things that you would need to be able to do. If you conceptualize China as a bad faith actor, which our assessment is you absolutely ought to in this context.
Yeah.
Certainly, it's a trustless situation to say the absolute least. Now you're in the trust but verify regime. Like that's strictly
absolutely,
right?
Absolutely.
Anything that looks, smells, or feels like trust but verify is something that we're all for. So absolutely, location tracking, tamper-proof enclaves, remote shutdown capabilities, all this stuff. The FlexEgg program in general, all and everything, all the constellation of things around it is essentially tooling for a future set of engagements that, by the way, AI itself can potentially help us to automate the development of some of those options too, not on the manufacturing side so much. And so that's one of the things where, anyway, when we think about the supply chain piece, carving out the parts of the problem that you can accelerate quickly with AI and then identifying the parts that you can't, but that you need to build capacity for today, that all kind of seems amazing. The challenge is it may not be online in time. Our belief is that it will not be. And so we're focused on contingency planning for what if you don't have the ability to trust but verify, and you are dealing with a very competent adversarial actor like China. That kind of is the world that we're most interested in, because it seems like the most likely and most challenging.
I'm completely with you. We're going to get into best case, worst cases, and what that looks like. But just to poke into some of the rest of these topics, by the way, FlexHeg. What should people Google if they're like, oh, this sounds kind of interesting? Like, what's the Googled phrase to like find the resources that you guys think are interesting about that that term?
Yeah, FlexHeg itself should bring up the
HEG, just flex-HEG.
It's all one word. So Flex HEG is
all one word. Got it.
Okay, I think they're talking about changing the term, but it should all pop up. Yeah.
Okay. Cool. Easy enough. So people can check that out. I want to get into the IP theft thing. So it was like 6 or 7 years ago. I interviewed Mike Brown for the first time. Love the guy. Got me my first talk at National Defense University a long time ago. Obviously, kind of wrote the paper on kind of technology transfer from China, kind of calling out some of the different, let's call it the toolkit of ways that IP is taken in across the board. Of course, what IP could conceivably be more important than how to build the sand god? So clearly there will be efforts in this regard. Clearly there already are. You guys are the only people I think I've ever heard talk publicly about how rampant you suspect this already is within the big Western labs. It's extremely uncouth, right? Because like there's a lot of things you can be canceled for, and like what, and I think China knows that, right? Like, are you racist against Chinese people, right? Like, so it's like you can pull on that string all day, and like, man, us whites will really dance. Like, we'll just dance, man. Like, let's fucking click our heels for you.
We can't as whites, but we would.
Yeah. Not really. I could. It was going to be ugly. It's not going to have a lot of rhythm, but whatever, you know. So,
we'll try hard.
Very good point. But so I think this doesn't get brought up because of how uncouth it is, and that people wouldn't be willing to speak about it. I think anything that's existential must be talked about. Period. And anybody who's mature, tuned in, is pretty clear this is in that context. Second, I think it's not talked about because people aren't under the hood. Although I'm kind of shocked. You see Daniel Kay and some of these other guys that left OpenAI. I don't know if any of them have even talked about this. Like, yeah, by the way, while I was on the inside, this stuff's all, I mean, God, why is the guy's name? Leopold or whatever, situational awareness brought this up. But like, why don't people fucking talk about this?
Okay, so there's a couple of things real quick. One, on the personnel security side, yes, absolutely, there are cultural sensitivities. Nobody wants to be labeled as racist. China is, the CCP rather, is thinking very strategically, absolutely knows that, and absolutely goes after its own diaspora, which not only do they ideologically consider to be part of, you know, the motherland,
Greater China,
rightfully under their control, but also they are fully aware that we are culturally sensitive to these things and don't want to press on these issues, and also that there are legal restrictions preventing companies from not hiring on this basis.
Incredible. Yeah.
And then the second piece, and Jared, please fill in these blanks. I'm kind of a machine gunning through this, but the second piece is largely liability based. So if an ex-OpenAI person were to come out and say, and Leopold is unusual, right, for having done this.
Did he hit the nail on the head with this, or did he just be like, I think there's issues with IP, or was he like, yeah, like Ming, I think, has jump drives full of stuff. Like, was he straight up, or was he not straight up? You know what I mean? Like, where are we at?
With situational awareness, I would say, without getting into specifics, he was very clear-eyed in a way that reflected, you know, it seems like a lot of reading that he had done in the past from public sources, but absolutely correctly made the inferences from that reading of, oh, these are the levels that the game was being played at, you know, back in 1980, whatever, or whatever it was during the Cold War. Therefore, adversaries must be far ahead of this now. And then, of course, he was seeing what was going on with OpenAI's own internal security. And so the problem, right, is that that's a risky move for anyone. And he only really advanced that because he was already fired and didn't have much to lose on that front. And so as a result, this is actually one of the advantages that we had when we were working with the State Department to put out that first report that went out last year, which was the first to break this issue about frontier AI security, which is that we could and were trusted to anonymize all of these reports. And so we were able to anonymize some very serious, incident reports. For example, I can't go into details, but there was one known incident of an attempt to take the weights of a frontier model off of a hyperscaler cluster that was internally traced to a Chinese NPT or APT, Advanced Persistent Threat. And similar stuff like this. And in fact, we spoke recently to a former assistant secretary of state for something important who really was dialed in on this stuff, because someone was skeptical that yes, there are a bunch of individual incidents, but how likely is it that there is actually a systematic effort of taking this stuff, right?
I would be doing it.
Yeah, so this individual
I would be doing it.
100%.
I mean, if I ran a whole country, I would be doing it, right?
Yep.
And he said, if the Chinese are not doing this, I will be so disappointed in them from having mingled with them before.
It's the obvious move.
It is what it is. I mean, I think trust but verify is like the only world to live in. I mean, sure, like France doesn't, they're not going to flex on us or anything, but like I think across the board we have to play trust but verify. But this point I think is super crucial. I really want to I want to click into this a bit because I'm a huge Track 2 advocate. Like Yi Zhang with the AC in Beijing was on recently, who I like a lot. I'm trying to get Shui Lan. I'm trying to get the Concordia guys. I'm in emails with the Concordia guys right now.
Mine's great.
And interested in their stuff. It's not like we're talking about any kind of trade secrets. We're just trying to knit together what the hell's the world look like? How do we avoid conflict? Got to keep those ideas flowing. A lot of those thinkers I respect. I like a hell of a lot of what Yi has to think about. But clearly, like, we should expect this stuff, right? And it's so not talked about. I think part of the benefit of you guys getting stuff that's kind of like, okay, under wraps so we can anonymize is now you can talk about real issues. I think the challenge is somebody could tune in and be like, oh, these Canadian fellas, they just really don't like Chinese people and they just have this fear and they're going to project, where's your evidence, buddy? And, you can't produce it, well, yada, yada. Like, as much as you can go into what this incident report that you mentioned, I won't ask what lab or whatever, but like, if I was running Anthropic or OpenAI, and the third guy who eats a certain kind of food for lunch does the same thing, you know what I mean? Like, I'm gonna start really, like, you would think that they would get pretty serious and they would start conversations with the government and be like, guys, this is the most powerful tech ever. Like, this is endemic and terrible and like not good for national security. Like, what bells are getting wrong when this stuff is happening? And what's the evidence of frequency that you guys are seeing enough to actually have the confidence to lay it in your report?
So one ingredient here that I think is important. So actually, I just want to first circle back to the point about, why are the other whistleblowers not sort of talking about this either?
Yeah.
There is a psychological dimension to this that's really important. When you're sitting down at the lunch table and looking across from you and you see Ming, you see your coworker, right? You see your coworker and you don't see a Chinese spy. You've talked to this coworker for years. Yeah. Your coworker, by the way, often is actually a patriot. Like the Ming is a patriot. That's the problem. See, the Chinese surveillance espionage state has mechanisms available to it to coerce, right? This is a coercion system. And so when you think about, one of the stories that was related to us, I don't think we can name the agency he was a part of, but this guy was working with an asset that had a connection onto some floor of a Berkeley dorm when the power went out. This power outage happens, and apparently all the Chinese nationals on the floor were freaking out because they had an obligation to do a time-based check-in with their CCP handlers. That is how widespread this is. That is just that's not like the problem is you hear a story like that and you want to not say it.
I just want it to be public because I want to link to one of these things, right? Like, I don't want people be like, oh, well, you hear one thing, Dan, and you're just agreeing with them. But like, I trust you've seen this, but like, is any of this shit ever let out ever, Jeremy?
This is the point of our work, right?
There is reporting. There's reporting about things that are very similar to this, right? Salt typhoon and volt typhoon. So this basically, this is on the cyber front, right? Where,
okay, let's hear it.
Yeah, where and there's basically two different kind of thrusts to it, but one of them is it was detected or realized 1 or 2 years ago that the Chinese state had been in the process of embedding basically backdoors into U.S. infrastructure across the board. So water, power, all of the internet, all of the backbone stuff. The idea being that they can hold us at risk at the flip of a switch and turn the lights out. And then what do? And some of these backdoors, and it's known that they've done this, some of these backdoors involve doing things like permanently disabling equipment. So when a large swath of your electrical equipment or transformers or whatever it is permanently disabled and you do not have the stock to replace it, then where are you if it's widespread enough as a country? You're in a very, very challenging place.
And I mean, in terms of these like hard examples, right, of this sort of thing, we certainly surfaced a whole bunch that weren't public before. And frankly, that was in a context where we had like senior national security officials from prior administrations and the current one in various contexts grabbing us by the lapels and saying, you have to share this. You have to get this out because I cannot do this.
It's so shitty. Exactly. It's like, honestly, like, is there a better advantage than that?
Yeah.
Is there a better advantage than like scared white people not wanting to be politically incorrect? I mean, it's like, it's just a force of nature, right? It's just like beautiful. I'd be fucking plucking that thing all day.
It's also the case though, that to your point, like there are a lot of fully public examples of exactly this sort of thing. We had, so Ed was talking about examples where, you know, the Chinese are coming often from functionally outside the country, potentially, to kind of crack our critical infrastructure. Diplomatic Spectre is another example of that. It's sort of spear phishing campaign against OpenAI employees specifically. But if we want to talk about insider threats, this is what, you know, we're talking about the lunchroom setting. Well, you had that former Google engineer who stole a bunch of AI trade secrets and siphoned them over to Chinese firms. You've got, you know, like a bunch of these cases that are unreported. Public. Yeah, like, but there are quite a few in the news.
There are warnings being flagged increasingly, right, by the heads of various agencies. I think it was the head of MI5 or a U.S. intelligence agency head, I forget which, who pointed out that the Chinese cyber espionage programs are bigger than every other major nation combined, including the United States.
Wouldn't surprise me.
So that's the scale. And the important thing is to recognize not just that that they are doing this, but how central this is to the entire strategy and in many ways the economy. Like it's not just that, oh, they're doing cyber hacking in some obscure way. They have, you know, they have buildings. They have a department of, you know, stealing our shit. They have an HR department in the building full of people stealing our shit with
supporting software ecosystem, right? Like you got to imagine basically like somebody gets a downloaded data and it's like, there's a system for this. You got to fill out a Q12. You put it
They have a system on the back end to essentially put in requests for, hey, we need this technology, you know, stolen to fill in this gap in the internal supply chain. So the thing is, like, a lot of this stuff is also not just public, but being stated, at least in certain words, by Chinese policy documents themselves, if you care to open them up and read them. Now, it's not stated that we are stealing the thing, but it is stated that our goal is to increase the overall robustness and resilience of our supply chains and indigenize all this technology and do all this stuff and push.
And then historically, SMIC, TSMC, right? I mean, like how many cases of this we've got to see?
Yeah. No, of course. I mean, all right. So, I want to touch on quickly your point here, Jeremy. Back in the day, like this whole thing of like diaspora people kind of leaving and then kind of more falling in love with where they land. I mean, that's a tale as old as time. I mean, the whole Greek world, it's like, a bunch of them would go from, somewhere in the Peloponnese to like the island of Corfu, and then they'd be there for 2 generations, and then they'd be their own thing. And then they'd be like, no, we like it here. This is our own thing. And then Greece would be like, we don't like, and then they'd try to like go over in there in a boat a couple times, and then it's like, fuck it, it's its own thing. Or like Sicily, it's like, you're great. Shit. All right, whatever. So it's like you can't. But now you could, what you get ongoing internet monitoring, and I think the example that you guys brought up on Rogan, which isn't the first time I've heard it, is sort of like, okay, hey, fella who works at Anthropic now, like your aunt Ling may not get her diabetes medication next month or whatever the case may be, right? Like that's a kind of leverage that just couldn't exist. A, in a free market democracy, and also B, in times of old. But now it can. Authoritarianism has some beautiful tools, some really, really powerful tools. But we're just like, they fit right underneath the radar of like what we're culturally allowed to think about and talk about. So what do we do about that problem? This didn't get into in Rogan too much, but I want to hear it from you guys right now, from what you're saying to the audience. Anthropic, DeepMind, OpenAI, everything that's meaningful is getting piped out the back door, or is certainly at risk of being piped out the back door, is what I think I'm hearing, and correct me if I'm wrong.
You have to assume for planning purposes that is occurring.
I would, I'm very open to assuming. So if that's true, what is to be done? I mean, like, what are your guys' recommendations?
So we have to be a little careful on this, unfortunately, because as you can imagine, the solution to certain problems like this is
itself a bit sensitive, and that's why some stuff was redacted. We had to redact some stuff from the most recent report. But by and large, we surface a bunch of recommendations in there. And on the personnel side, I mean, number one, it's already a big step to be talking about it. That's good, but it's not enough. One thing that just needs to happen is companies, or there needs to be a mechanism that even allows companies legally to react to this risk.
100%. 100. Yeah. It would like what plays out in my mind is this. Dario, Sam, Demis get together. They're like, yeah, we're all racing each other. I want to build a sand god first. I know it's going to kill us as soon as we have it, but I'd like to be the most important human that's ever lived for like a period of 2 months before I'm consumed. I'm trying to completely beat you on the way there. But in order for us to get there, instead of one of the Chinese folks, one of us wants to ride the dragon at that final moment before we all get consumed, right? One of us. All right, cool. So we want to make sure the Chinese don't do it. If that's true, we got to go to our Western governments and we got to make it their demand on us so we can still look good to say, guys, this is all piping out the back door. You need to come from the fucking top, press it down on all of us in AI hardware software that like Chinese nationals like literally can't like work here anymore or like have to like be, do some other kind of job. Like, what does this look like?
So I want to add another ingredient that makes the picture a bit more challenging too, which is that Chinese nationals in these labs are some of the most important employees in the lab.
Certainly. Brilliant people. People.
And you'll run into cases where if you look at the supply chain for like frontier AI training runs or inference optimization, there's like one dude in some cases who is like the go-to dude for a thing. And it's not that if you take that dude out of the picture, you're going to lose immediately to your adversaries. But if you take too many of those Jenga sticks out of the tower, eventually so there's that element where you're actually thinking about bench depth and how much can you get away with. So that's one piece, which has been very, very formative in our thinking about this. There's a question around background checks. You can do an awful lot more. And this is in our report in the redacted version. It's the public version. You can do a lot better than what we're doing on background checks, including government background checks. You'd be amazed at how bad government background checks for security clearances is. So, for example, one thing that does not get considered in these background checks is information that is written in a language other than English. So think about that for a second.
Like a big thing to overlook, right?
Yeah, it feels like a giant thing.
Like the Global Times publishes an article about like oh, Tom is like the fucking best spy, dude. Tom crushes. He is stealing all the shit for us, and you just can't, like, it's written in Mandarin, so it's like, I guess Tom is fine. Like,
You don't see it.
That's one tiny dimension. There's other shit like the interactions between like local law enforcement and state level databases and the Fed do not happen in the way they need to. You lose all kinds of information about people's activities abroad. You're not tapping into addent sources of information, basically other than the stuff the government has, private sector sources. You can do so much better. And these sorts of things we know, having talked to some of the most elite people on this particular segment alone, we know that you can do not everything you need to do here, but you can do a lot better.
If anyone listening wants to start a company to do background checks the right way,
let's do it.
They can,
Yeah.
we will write you a check for that.
I like the sound of it. I mean, the other thing that kind of dawns on me here is that in order to not be the bad guy, right? Because people would be like, oh, what's next? You're going to put him in internment camp? You know, like, and by the way, I don't think that like it's wholly flippant for us to be like, oh yeah, get rid of the Chinese. Like, I don't like the sound of it. I really don't. I mean, not just because like I dance when people tell me to dance because I should be ashamed of, I don't know, some people that like
the Japanese internment camps were a thing, right? I mean,
it was definitely a thing.
Yeah,
and it you know, like we could you know, not as bad as you know, Nanking or what have you, right? I mean, you know, you want to weigh some things out. I mean, you know, not saying we need to go there in any regard at present here, but I think this just general concern I think is huge. The issue is, you know, there's some of it public, some of it's kind of under wraps. People don't want to talk about it. Sunlight can't be a disinfectant when there is no sunlight. So it seems to me like what would also have to happen for this to happen is we need to just, the U.S., like if I was the DOD or something, I'd be like militantly scooping up these known examples of when this has happened within these bigger corporations and then like throw it out straight up public somewhere. Be like, this is what's happening here. This is the United States of America. These are key technologies. There's already these bans. Like, these people are being coerced. They're not all bad people, but like, here is literally the message that said Aunt Ling is not going to get her diabetes medication. We're not going to fucking stand for this, yada, yada. Like, in my opinion, sunlight before you start banning people.
Interesting, isn't it? That are one sort of, this goes back to the open society and its enemies, but the one mechanism that seems to be so useful in this direction is something that we have an allergy to. Our institutions are allergic to exactly the kind of, they think of it as risk, lack of authenticity, really. They're allergic to authenticity in this way. They don't want to convey that because they're worried about lawsuits, they're worried about being called out, they're worried about being Twitter canceled or X canceled, whatever, right? Mm-hmm. So it's our enemies have taken our full measure in this sense, and they've done a great job. Yes, this is how you take down a pluralist liberal democracy. That's like kudos, and now we have to respond. Like, that's kind of the next step, right? It's up to us.
Yeah, I mean, I think this whole point just has to be aired out. Look, in all seriousness, even talking to you guys, I wish there was just more exact examples of humans and threatening messages from their handlers and known lab incidents. Like, that's what I would want from this conversation. I'm a little sad I don't have it. I think the topic is great. I just, you know, I really wish there was sunlight here. I want to move on just for the sake of time. I got a couple quick things to just skip the stone on, and then we're going to get a little bit into those recommendations for governance towards the very end here. One thing I want to touch on, you know, artificial general intelligence. You don't have to give any background for this audience, luckily. But a lot of people are not necessarily convinced, right? It's sort of like, well, it'll just be a toaster oven, but it'll be really capable, right? We'll tell it to like design some new physics for some new plane that can do some new thing, and then it'll just kind of go back in its box and it'll say, what would you like next, sir? And that'll be the end of the whole shebang. Now, of course, Bengio and Hinton have finally flipped on this. I mean, it took them until ChatGPT. Scary, by the way. Scary. What's it going to take to get the everyman to flip? Whoa, brother. Whoa, brother. Like, oh, I have no idea what it's going to get the everyman to flip. But I can tell you from my own conversations with kind of current and recent past DOD people, you know, Shanahan, Kukor will be in the same series. Kukor now is like, I think with a company that's more or less funded by Palantir, so probably on the microphone, he can't really talk about AGI writ large. I'm not blaming him, by the way. I think incentives rule the world, by the way. So I don't blame people when like that's what their incentives align for. But like Shanahan is no longer in the DOD, and only recently has kind of come a little bit around more to like AGI kind of being a thing. It would feel to me that in order for this risk to be serious enough to take the steps we've been talking about here, someone would need to see AGI as something different than like the internet or like chat bots, right? And by the way, I'm not saying Shanahan's ideas are that banal. They're certainly not, but with no notion of sort of really what vast post-human capabilities could look like, or really sort of a kind of a no stance on agency and volition outside of direct individual one-by-one human prompting, I think you don't really treat it like a categorically different species-level hardcore thing. But I think we'd have to do the things you're recommending. So what have you seen as the kind of stance and the tenor and the receptivity around AGI within the public sector? Where is it strong? Where is it weak? I mean, it seems mostly weak as hell. And what should we do to flip it? So let's start with that first question, if you guys could.
So to address that, you talked a lot about DoD, and so DoD is almost unimaginably huge, and yet even it is only one small part of the gargantuan organism that is the entire United States government. And so that hugeness is almost the defining quality of the US government. And one of the things that has given us a bit of a unique view is just the fact that we've spoken to so many people in so many departments and at so many levels. So from the standpoint of, does the US government writ large believe AGI to be a new kind of qualitatively different thing? Different places believe different parts of it. DoD particularly is culturally focused on adoption and cutting through its own red tape. So folks like Jack and folks who are at the levels of like on the civilian leadership side at OSD, but also at the senior leadership side, so the generals and admirals, are the ones who basically have to pull their middle-level management into adopting this technology, because if they don't,
it's painful and hard.
It's not going to happen. So we work with DoD. We work with DoD on AI adoption, and the reason we do this is that. Frankly, by the time, we get AGI or we get superintelligence, DoD is still going to be trying to get, O3 into its systems. And
totally.
So there's really, it actually is just, from that perspective, it's almost just purely supportive to bring those capabilities in. But that means that DoD folks tend to be anchored around what's going to help the warfighter? Like, what can we put in the warfighter's hands today? And
get
so
this
much
job
more
done. It's mission focused.
That's
it's sort of practical.
And the criticality.
Yep.
Yeah, the criticality rules their mindset. They are the good folks there are thinking like, hey, if for lack of this capability, a bunch of guys out there get killed, like that's on me. That's on me. And they understand the duty for that. So it's totally understandable that DoD folks in particular have this frame. Now, that's not generally, or not always, what you see in the intelligence community, in places like the Department of Energy, where you have folks who are much more kind of scientifically anchored and much more WMD oriented, and actually are in these spaces where they're thinking, you can have a single thing that creates an incident with a really large blast radius, and how do we put controls around that thing, and how do we build infrastructure and security around that thing, and blah, 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 blah. So it really does depend on the cultures of the individual departments and agencies first, but also this is true at every fractal level. You've got a gigantic department that has some kind of culture. Within that department, you might have a bureau that's pretty big, like a few thousand people. So the Bureau of International Security and Non-Proliferation at the State Department, it's right there in the name. Yeah, they're going to be thinking a little bit more about this stuff culturally. And then within that, you have individual offices. So at the Department of Energy, there's an Office of Critical and Emerging Technology that got formed relatively recently. They think very, very hard about this stuff. Many folks in these spaces, I mean, they've read Leopold's situational awareness.
They read like Bostrom and stuff like that?
Yeah, it's in the water. And so you talk through it. It's like I'm there. I'm right there with you.
Clarify though, like it's not even universal at that level, but this is just a first order pass, right? So we've run into at all these departments. You'll run into the small team, and it's often like to speak to incentives, right? One is the incentives that come from money or power, and Ed just did a great job of explaining how some of that works in the U.S. government. Another is the incentives that, to some degree, just come from identity. So you'll have a lot of people who, the classic, if you want the archetypal person who is like very likely to just dismiss all this AGI talk, and has a technical background, go find somebody who studied AI before the year 2015. And has a master's in AI. This is the most dangerous kind of person to themselves and to others that exists in Congress, in the U.S. government. It doesn't matter. Yeah. These are folks who think that they understand and are often turned to by other people in their organizations as the local guru on the issue, and they could not be more clueless. And we've had a lot of these kind of interactions where you'll talk to these people. It's almost vaguely like talking to Gary Marcus, where they'll reach for something. They'll say, well, an AI still can't do X. Where it's like, dude, like I can literally get it to do it on my phone right now. Did you even bother using the paid version of ChatGPT? Because you're not trying right now.
Like, and to tie up this point real quick, we talked about hugeness. With hugeness comes slowness.
Of course.
And the stuff we're talking about is a moving target, and it's changing rapidly. 1 year to 18 months ago, you might be able to find individual humans in these spaces who would come to you and say, hey, I believe this and I'm concerned about it, but I don't want to bring this up in a professional space. And so they'd tell you about it over drinks. As of maybe end of last year, beginning of this year, you would have you had entire offices in some spaces that were fully like AGI pilled and on board. And so we are, I think, I don't know if it's the final phase, but we are pretty close to this breaking out right up into the surface. It's like common knowledge or whatever it's called.
There's one other element to this too, and I think it sort of cuts both in the technical and the policy direction. So there's this phenomenon. So we like do some angel investing, and one of the things that we've noticed about ourselves is we'll rarely angel invest in domains where we ourselves have built startups before, because we just see all the problems.
Yeah. That space is so hard to make a sale. Oh, the customer's really tough there. But it's like in the other industries, you just don't know why it's tough. Right?
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. Right. And that's why so often the advice is bet on the founder, because that's what's going on. This is both a problem. So we think about like, well, why did Hinton and Bengio take so long? Ed and I started trying to convince, we had a family friend that we spent like 3 years trying to desperately convince that AGI was going to be a real thing, and he pushed back a ton, and then he wouldn't buy into the risk picture, and then, all this stuff, and it took forever, and now finally he's on board, but this happens over and over and over again.
Oh, it's bad.
And the challenge is you see why did we start off so early? Well, it's in I guess we were technical, but we weren't literally building the systems at that time. And that makes it so much easier, right? To step back and be like, oh, damn, that's a real thing.
Here's a crazy consequence of that. The U.S. Department of State got this before Jeff Hinton did.
Yeah, that's so wild.
At least one office, right? In the U.S. Department of State.
Yeah, one office. Fair.
Bengio talked about, he's actually the first Trajectory episode is with Bengio. And he talked about for 15 minutes, what got him to change his mind, because I polled him 10 years ago on AGI risk, and it just wasn't it was kind of absolutely not even worth talking about kind of thing. Still have the survey response from back in the day, but I mean, to his credit, he's one of the few people that had enough, I guess, he didn't have that vicious kind of pride where he would refuse to change his mind. He was very frank about what made him change his mind. And also, to his credit, he said, Daniel, the things we were building were so stupid. And it's when you're that close to it, actually, maybe that is what it was. It's day to day, you're working with academic funds, doing academic stuff, trying to get some basic stuff done. And it wasn't doing massive things. So you're not thinking about those big leaps.
And this happens, by the way, at the level of the government too. So when you talk to people who are used to trying to wrangle the government apparatus, all they see are the problems. And so when you approach them with a new issue,
this is
all
interesting.
they see are like, this is never going to get solved in a million years. They're not thinking about, well, what actually happens when the US government at the political level starts to wake up and goes, oh, no, like, the Defense Production Act is now being fucking invoked. Like you're doing this thing or whatever authorities appropriations get opened up. So all they see are the blockers. And it's fascinating. It leads to this phenomenon where now their incentive is to find a way to cope with the reality that they're in. And that involves making the issue itself disappear. You see this also in the AI safety universe where people don't want to look at the China thing because they're looking at the AI loss of control risk and they take it seriously. They see the evidence.
You're right.
Like, loss of control is real. Therefore, China must be able to do a kumbaya with us, and vice versa.
Totally. I think the smart folks don't have that take, but there certainly is like, yeah, let's bomb the data centers of OpenAI, and then things will slow things down, and it'll be good. It's like, it's clearly more complex than that, and I'm sure we all have blind spots. So this is it sounds like there's pockets where people care. And you guys feel like you're optimistic that more folks will flip, but it's good to get that visage kind of under the hood there. I want to touch on two questions here before we wrap that I think are going to be extremely important. One of them is talking about the downsides. I think we've done enough of it, and I really need to put this on the table for both of you. It's like, what's a win here? I look out in the world too, and I'm like, yeah, we're going to have AGI before the government has any idea what's going on, before the big enterprises have any idea what's going on. So we're mostly just going to get caught off guard with this stuff. And it's sort of like, you read your guys' report, or I just look at the world as I've seen it for this last, 14 years or so. And I see, okay, what's the best case? We can't cooperate with China really outside of like having a bunch of track 2 dialogues. Maybe there's some small degrees of cooperation along some specific lines to prevent some non-state actors. 18 months in the future, we're both way closer to AGI, or we're kind of mostly already there, but like mostly we haven't destroyed ourselves and like haven't destroyed each other, and like that's it. And then 5 years later, we definitely have AGI. Most of the fighter planes are AI. Like the boots on the ground, like warriors, many of which are AGI. The ones that matter are extended to AGI. They're all the epitome of dexterity. They don't even have hominid forms. They can change to wheels and other kinds of shit. And it's like, okay. And then 5 years after that, what's it like? Like now it can like manipulate space time and like do some shit we don't know, like, go to like take pictures on Jupiter's surface, like shit like that. And like, but luckily it just stays in the little jar and just does what we want it to do. And so it's like, what the fuck is a win? We build this thing we can't control. They build the thing we can't control, or maybe we slow them down a little bit. We're going to talk about that. But like, is there even a lily pad that we could stand on for, a couple years? I'm not saying a permanent happy stasis. I'm saying, is there even a lily pad to get to? Or is it like, nope, Dan, the best we got is grit your teeth harder every minute that we're not in kinetic war with China, and that the sand gods have not just erupted with goals and objectives as far beyond ours as ours are beyond the sea snail, and we're fucking toast. Like, real talk, guys. What's the win here?
There's so this is actually the main thing that we thought about, that we worked backwards from in this whole scenario, right? Like, it's not, if you read situational awareness, there's no win condition there. That's not a win condition. It's the exponential is really taking off, and let's wait until it kind of becomes an S curve, and hopefully, like, it's not at all clear what the world looks like where everything is stable on the back end. You talked about incentives ruling the outcome. That's exactly true. What do we have playing out right now at the highest level of organization on planet Earth? We have competitive incentives between primarily the United States and China, but adversaries. So that layer is going to dominate everything else unless it's dealt with. So the first question is, how do you deal with that? We're not going to have a conversation about how do you regulate AI domestically in the US without dealing first with that top level problem, because every conversation—
the state of nature. The state of nature has to define the conversation. Yep.
Exactly. We're going to just cascade down the levels of abstraction, and that's how it's going to have to go, as you would doing change management in any organization, if you will. So you start with what is the outer incentive loop? It's US-China. How does that get dealt with? Well, we just explored this idea of having a kumbaya moment with China. We don't think that's at all likely on the time horizons that have been proposed. Again, would love to see FlexHeg, would love to see Trust But Verify, secure governable chips, all that shit. That's amazing. Let's do it. Probably not going to be done in time. So what does that leave us with? It leaves us with trying to interfere with their stuff. It leaves us with taking all the measures we can to slow down, degrade, deny, disrupt China's ability to build AI, not just AI models, but AI chips, to build photolithography machines, to build etching, to do everything all along the supply chain. That is the frank assessment that I think any reasonable person having bought, if you may disagree with the things that get us here, but once you're here, you kind of have to go that next step. A lot of people will kind of balk at that idea, but that's sort of again, I mean,
the logic compels you there because if you think about it, right? If you want to have a shot at aligning, an AGI or a super intelligent system, presumably, you need a fair amount of margin, and margin means time. It means resources, but primarily it means time. Okay, so how do you get time? Well, assuming you are out ahead, assuming your AGI thing is the furthest ahead, you need to some combination of run faster yourself and or slow down whoever your nearest adversary or adversaries are. And running faster is an option, but it's also the thing that reduces your margin if you have a finite amount of time and capability points to go before you pass that threshold. And so you are basically forced to the conclusion that, okay, that means we need to do denial, degradation, disruption.
And by the way, this has to come hand in hand with fortification, right? Because if you just hit the gas and China is siphoning off all your IP, well, you're just dragging them forward faster, right? So you have to first secure the clusters, and then you look at degrading at the same time. Those two things they're two parts of a whole here.
Yeah, I mean, and we're going to get into this kind of slowing China down shebang. I mean, it's like, I like to look squarely at things as uncouth and as gruesome as they are, because it's just so hard to do anything but that and expect that you have any reasonable chance of getting to what you want to get to. But, even for me, I grit my teeth, at God, fucking, disrupting their, supply chains or blowing up their chip factory, whatever stuff. We'll talk about your specifics in a second. It's still just damn, But
also, if you scope it, keep in mind, if you scope it to that, right? If it stays scoped to that, not that many people are going to get killed. Assuming it stays scoped to that.
Yeah.
By the way, sorry, I want to add an element to this too, because I think there's in the back of a lot of people's minds at this stage of the conversation, you have the question that comes up. Well, so you're betting World War III on us not being able to control AI. Right. So let's say I listened to Dan and his thing about, now they're on Jupiter taking photos of the surface and all that. What if I just I think we'll get alignment by default or something. I just don't buy.
Certainly not my opinion, but yeah, go ahead.
Sure. Yeah. But it's a lot of people's opinion in this space. I think one thing that people don't often reconcile or come to terms with is that the weaponization risk implied by these capabilities. If we have AI systems that can do designer bioweapons, that can do just even the autonomous cyber attacks, you think about taking down the Western interconnect like that. This is absolutely something that is fully within the realm of possible with sophisticated AI agents. We're already seeing, nap time to big sleep, all the kind of increasingly powerful cyber capabilities that come with these agentic systems. We're already at that point, right? We're ticking boxes on the OpenAI preparedness framework, right? So at some point, you get a tool that just from purely a weaponization standpoint, China can have us by the balls. And so the question really, I mean, you may disagree with that, in which case we're back to a conversation about timelines. But assuming you buy that thesis, you are absolutely in the business of interceding on an adversary's development of a potentially absolutely decisive WMD. That's just what this is.
Yeah, I mean, I think, well, for me, if we keep going with the logic here, gentlemen, for me, we start getting pretty squarely into all things are matter and void taking new form. The amount of splashing between matter and void is about to be really, really, really rapid. This torch that has opposable thumbs doesn't seem like it's got a lot of, like, I look at my watch, man, I'm not feeling great. God bless your soul, Jeremy, for having kids and all that. But like, I look, I'm like, whoop, don't know, boys. So for me, like, you really stretch this out, what you get to is like, okay, really going to be tough for the shredder of creative destruction that is to come between the international forces and between the probably unalignable sand god that, like, even if it does what we want, we'll be able to have it do things. Like, you guys ever drive a cat to the vet? Where you're like driving to the vet and it's looking out the window like, what the fuck is going on? You know, like we're like but here's the thing about that situation. You can't explain what even a car is to the cat. Never mind, like, miles per hour. Like, you're just, you're doing something even for it. You're doing something for it that is fucking gonzo beyond its possible level of conception. It doesn't strike me as wildly unrealistic that even if it behooves our interests, we'll get to places where we're just, go ahead.
The next step, if I read you correctly, like you're saying, like, okay, we've got this US-China thing. So great. Let's say we take China out of the race in a decisive way. We still haven't dealt with the fucking super intelligence loss of control issue. I completely agree. This gets us to the next layer of abstraction.
Go on.
So we've just talked about US, China, or I should just say kind of international kind of geostrategy, geopolitics. What's the next level of abstraction? It's okay, assuming that an allied consortium or whatever is the only body realistically capable of building these systems. What do we then do? And keep in mind, we now live in a world where we're literally willing to, like, risk kinetic warfare with a superpower, nuclear superpower, to do what we have done. I think that this changes the tone in Washington in some pretty fundamental ways. I mean, allow us the assumption that the conversation in DC at this stage does not sound like, oh, well, we've got to get out of the way of the private sector so they can innovate. It sounds more like, holy shit, we're in a, like, very close to hot war with China, or we've just disempowered them or secured a kind of stable, pseudo-stable geopolitical environment. Should we really have private actors continuing to forge ahead in the completely unshackled way that they are right now? Probably not. And so there's a healthy psychological effect that this has. Again, if this is true, right, this will only happen to the extent that AI continues to demonstrate increasing weaponizability. So it's not like we're saying, go do this right now in the absence of anything else. No, far from it. Far from it. We're just answering the reality's question of, what do you do if AI does show definitive signs of being a WMD this time, like 18 months from now? This is the whole purpose of the exploration. You have to buy that hypothetical. We're not saying right now, lock down the labs, hit China hard, whatever. Yeah. It's about building opportunity for this eventuality. Given that we're there, if this happens with China, I think the conversation domestically looks very, very fucking different from what it does right now. You have authorities that get opened up. You have a public interest that opens up and all kinds of things.
Basically, in that world, we realize we haven't really been trying this entire time.
Oh, yeah, we're definitely not trying. We're definitely not trying.
Oh, yeah, I agree.
Nobody fucking cares right now. Like, nobody cares. Like, I should never talk to a DOD person without being like, all right, let's talk about the main thing. Like, there should never be one of those, but there are all the time. There's only one main thing. But like, we're at, no one even cares about the main thing. How could we be trying? I agree with you. But like, again, I look at, frankly, gentlemen, a pretty stark onslaught of what reality is going to bring to us. Sort of like, you blow up enough Chinese data centers, they've got enough nukes, like, already, gentlemen, already, right? And so that's just that. But never mind, let's just say China democratizes and they become Japan in a 4-week period, whatever the case may be, okay? Even then, again, like, the uncontrollability of artificial general intelligence, but the requirement to race into capability space without knowing how to control it in order to handle this state of nature dynamic, really, I see the waves of creative destruction lapping up so quickly that, like, it's really unlikely that, like, stuff's gonna be all right. And like, the place that makes me go, like, you just keep carrying the logic out. Geez, that'd be tragic. Dan, why would it be tragic? Well, because there seems to be this project of life. Like, presumably you guys are real. I think you are. I think you have inner movies that play in your head like I have in my head. Like, that feels cool. And like you're a more developed version of that than whatever part of Rodentia and whatever sort of, tapeworm you were before that. We go back enough generations. That project of like sentient stuff that can have conversations and, fall in love and invent things and whatever, that actually feels like a good project. Like the whole project, I'm not even just people, like the project itself feels good. The tragedy is not just the squashing of man, but the squashing of that entire project of non-dead stuff existing. And it strikes me that like, I don't know how much soft and squishy is going to make it out. Like, I just hope that the flame, which I would call like sentient, autopoetic stuff, like self-creating, expanding of potentia, as we are a higher expanded potentia than worms. Like, I hope that stuff makes it out of this. Because I think this stuff is just going to get blendered. Like, I think it's like, it's just like banana and fucking peanut butter and just like, boom, like none of those ingredients, like none of them ingredients are going to look great. Like can we at least hope that the flame makes it out of this, even if it doesn't have opposable thumbs? Like, this is where my logic goes.
If you're going to have that, right, this does not happen in a setting where the development of AI is dominated by racing dynamics,
totally
either
not.
at the geopolitical level
Totally
or
not.
at the level of
Totally
industry.
not.
Yeah. So the scenario, the good news is the scenario we've just sketched out here is one in which if the U.S. can prevent dictatorial adversaries from doing this, and then suddenly has this awakening that like, hey, this is a WMD capability, not something to be done in the private sector. By then, you're also connecting a lot of lines like, one of the common things when people say, loss of control isn't that big of a risk. One of the common objections, not the only one of the common objections is AI won't be able to do really nasty things to humans, right? Well, by now, you also have that box ticked. You also probably have some warning shots at this stage of the form of, Palisade Research, Epic AI, all that stuff.
But also, you can be in a space, right, where depending on where open source is at relative to the, like, you can absolutely get into a space where an open source model is released that seems like pretty safe, but it's agentic, and so people are using it to build agents that whiz around the internet doing stuff. Someone discovers some scaffold or elicitation technique that gets it to, help you design a bioweapon or some other crazy thing. And there does come a point where the amount of work required to have a large blast radius is within the hands of like the first motherfucker who wants to see the world burn.
Absolutely.
So
it's the black ball, the Nick Bostrom black ball example, right? At some point you pull out a technology where just anybody can just completely cause destruction. I agree with you, Ed. Go on.
And you can imagine stuff not necessarily terminal and not even necessarily vastly destructive, but stuff like that serving as a warning shot. I think that there was some investor. What the hell was his name? Do you know what I'm talking about, Dan? He was talking on the news about being in a closed door. Yeah, he's a famous commodities investor from way back in the day. I forget his name.
Yeah. I saw this circulate on Twitter. It's evading me now, but people can look it up on Twitter. But like, remind me of the gist again.
Yeah, so this guy, and it really bugs me, I can't remember his name, but we can figure that out after. He was talking about being at a closed door meeting with a bunch of AI people and just generally a bunch of kind of household names and stuff. And it was basically rules were no attribution, but he could talk about what was said. And all the AI folks, I think, said greater than 10% chance that we, all get wiped out by AI within some time frame. And he's like, and someone telling him like, no, like people aren't going to wake up until 50 to 100 million people have been killed or some crazy shit like that. And he's like, hey, I'm, I bought a ranch and I'm like, battening down the hatches. And there's this news story that came out not long ago where Ilya was apparently talking about putting the OpenAI folks in a bunker because like
he knows the game.
Yeah, people like the people who are inside get what's going to happen.
Everybody in the know gets the game, right? It's like but here's the deal. They don't really have a choice. So Ilya's got fundamentally two choices. I'll let you know what they are. Choice one, somehow win the arms race to general intelligence and for 2 seconds to maybe 2 months, in some weird best case 2 years, be the single most important entity that's ever sort of had like exhibited agency and expressed their volition sort of on the planet Earth ever. Be the most important thing of all time, and then it's eventually be consumed by this sand deity, and then it will go, then it's your offspring that goes and populates the multiverse, potentially, assuming it can do that. Or here's a second option. Watch someone else birth that sand god, watch them ascend to the final king of everything, and then be killed by their sand god, knowing that their great child will be the ultimate determiner of the totality of the rest of life, assuming the thing is sentient as it goes on. That's all he's got. And so these guys can't talk about it because, like, if they talked about it, they'd be seen as evil. Like, they all know, like, this is rough, right? Some of them have kids and stuff, but they can't talk about it because it's like, what's my choice? Am I going to step out of the race? And then am I going to watch men of their stamp, watching someone else be that much more successful? This is not amenable.
I'll give you, I'm trying to think if, like I said, so there's a conversation that we had with a Frontier Lab CEO who everyone knows well. And so he had this thesis that he was trying to get us to buy, that there's going to be a multipolar world on AGI. And if you look at the kind of like the potential for like already the automation, right, of like NVIDIA's using AI to design their chips. OpenAI itself is kind of like internally using AI to automate more and more research. That is their explicit trajectory. That is their target, is their personal self-improvement. So when you hear that, like, everyone knows on the inside of the industry that like the math behind compounding exponentials is not multipolar. That is not where you end up with. You know what else is exponential? The flu. The flu is exponential. But there was only one COVID because it's just like anyway, there are all kinds of reasons, whatever. That's a bad example. But the bottom line is, this is neither the...
No, it's kind of a good example, right? Because while there were multiple strains of COVID, which ones ended up dominating? The ones that grew the fastest. And in fact, the one that grew the fastest.
The one that you and I all, that we all got.
We all got. Yeah.
So that's, and the thing is, like, in that conveation... obviously
they know, bro. They
know, because we talk to whistleblowers from these labs constantly. And by the way, I just want to call out explicitly, like, the lab I'm talking about is not Anthropic. They're a different case, and they're quite. We see far less dissonance. So you don't see the kind of dissonance between when you talk to somebody at OpenAI. You get the sense that you're talking to a whistleblower. Like when we speak to people from OpenAI or like for this investigation, and this is a biased sample, right? These are people who are interested in the issue. Like, got to flag that out the gate. That's true. And by the way, a lot of them have since left OpenAI, which is its own problem, with OpenAI essentially treadmilling out all the people who are most kind of concerned about this. Yep. But anyway, you get the sense that they're like, they don't want it to be known. That they've been talking to you, that they say X to leadership and leadership says Y to them, but neither of those things are what's said publicly and all that jazz. The opposite is true with Anthropic. By and large, you certainly do get people who disagree with leadership, but in general, they're aware that there's this incentive structure. That you get the sense that they would easily have surfaced, and in fact have surfaced, all these objections to leadership anyway, that it's a flowing conversation. The lab in question here was not that lab. And I think that's
every
quite relevant.
lab. Yeah, every lab has its own character.
Culture.
Google DeepMind is it's like an amorphous mass of smart people. Yeah. Anyway.
So, all right, I'm going to try to bring this stuff home. I'm going to wrap us in 10 minutes or so, but this is so much more to go into here. And I mean, the fact that people are like, well, look, I mean, Musk only said it was Russian roulette odds. That's not so bad. It's like, well, first of all, that's fucking ridiculously bad. But second of all, he knows it's higher than that. I mean, he's been talking about it for 10 years. You guys remember the clips. You remember the summon the demon thing. Well, it's a decade ago. Everybody remembers that. I mean, like, he knows the game, but here's the ball game, gentlemen. You either ride that fucking thing at the final moments of bio life and you are the king of everything, or you watch another man do it before you. And that is not amenable to persons of their state. It's just not going to work. And to Jeremy's point, the way I'm not shelling this, I want you guys to layer on what the audience should take away. But the way I'm thinking about it, again, you're saying, well, you do this, so you go to this level of logic, and well, you kind of got to do that. You got to sabotage some things. You go to this level of logic. And again, for me, it's like the level of logic is creative destructive waves are going to splash back and forth so much. I don't plan on any individual forms that are around right now to really like make it out the back end of it. I really hope that the flame of the project of which we are a part, non-dead matter, that is, I would hope that that would persist, because it seems like that's a worthwhile project as far as I can tell. But a worthy successor is unlikely to be conjured by a brute military and economic arms race. Nobody's studying whether these things are sentient or whether they could, blossom value into the world as biology has blossomed you guys out of rodents, or me out of rodents, right? I mean, like, no one's studying that. We're just studying how to crush the adversary. And so the scenario is slow down China enough. This is me nutshelling brutally, by the way. I'm going to miss some things, okay? Like, get our act together, find a way to stop leaking data, which might involve some politically incorrect stuff, but like find ways to make that stuff public and get that problem gonzo. Then start slowing down China. And keep up as much track two as we can, build as much friendship with individual people as we can. I think it's a goddamn shame we're fighting a nation where the vast majority of people fucking, don't want to harm us and we don't want to harm them. But it is what it is, authoritarian regimes. So do all that. And then maybe when there's enough of that stuff, and then the populace, the political singularity occurs where 1 out of every 20 everyman people is aware that this is the main thing, then maybe some degree of coordination could occur. And there might be a period where some of this tech could be consciously molded in some level that could be slightly better. It seems like that's best case, and it's all pretty tough here. But tell me, like, what do you want the audience to leave with that I just missed? I know I missed some things.
I think one piece – so, by the way, I think that's actually not a bad nutgelling.
Okay.
I think the question marks – yeah, the 3 question marks that happen right before the word profit in this case are what the hell happens after you have a de facto soft nationalization of AI research domestically in the United States or among its allies. Yep. That's where, and that was outside the scope of what we're working on. All we can say is, as a precondition to any kind of success, however that may be defined, we must stop the racing dynamic with China. The only realistic way to do that is what we have described. At least that's our sense from researching this for like years. And then there's the dimension domestically. We must figure out how to do the soft nationalization play. There's then questions around, oversight of this sort of project. We go into that a little bit in the report, having talked to folks who look at the nuclear chain of command as an analogy. We didn't have time to do a thorough workup, transparency, all that good shit. But that's roughly where the story ends for us. Not in the sense that we all die, in the sense that you at least are creating stability, kind of recursive stability through all those layers. And that's, that's tricky. Now, the one thing I will say, Ed, feel free to fill this in, is incentives actually do a lot of the legwork here. So if you actually, the story as you've described, right, makes it sound like we need super agency to carry us through every layer of the stack and every move. But I mean, let's think about what happens by default. By default, 05, 06, whatever the next model is, comes out. Its capabilities above a certain level will obviously be WMD-like, or at least WMD enabling. There will obviously then be a response from the U.S. national security apparatus, from the Chinese. There will obviously be an adversarial dynamic at play. Yes, we will sniff each other's butts around cooperation. No one's going to really buy it. And then we're going to enter the regime that we talked about. So the incentives get you most of the way there. The question is, what do you have to put in place ahead of time so that we don't look back 2 years from now or 18 months from now going, damn, I wish we had built secure data centers. I wish we had mapped the adversary's supply chains from a denial standpoint. I wish we'd done all these workups around personnel security at our frontier labs so that the secrets, trade secrets of today that shape the training runs of 2 years from now didn't leak to our adversaries right now. These are what we call the one-way doors of this space, the decision points that we walk through without thinking. But once the incentives finally allow us to do what must be done at that stage, if we get there, we'll wish we had, like, you can't retroactively fix. So that's kind of, I think the incentives get us a good chunk of the way there. We just need to do the one-way doors right.
And we are actively working on this is kind of the follow-on to what we just put out. we are actively working on defining those standards for how do you do a secure build, because that is crucial. So if there's anyone who is working in a similar space or on similar stuff, we'd love to talk to those folks, because we're still talking to all the individuals who contributed to that report on what needs to be in place when the starting pistol finally goes off.
If it does, right? All this is contingent.
It's all contingent.
You can disagree with the thesis up to any which point, but
we want to be wrong. We want to be wrong about this, right?
Yeah.
But
it's just a toaster oven forever, gentlemen. It'll never really be all that powerful, or
Hey, and look, this is how you think about investing in startups, or even starting a startup, right? It's like at the earliest stage, we know empirically, all you need is a story that makes sense for how you're going to get from here to the giant success. That's all you need. That's all it takes to make it worth investing a significant amount of work and effort into doing. It's not always going to work out, but if you have that story, if you have that thread that you can follow, we know that if you're dogged enough, if you're compelled enough, and if you're creative enough, and if enough folks are working alongside you and trying to make it happen, you can turn that into a success and make it work.
When it's about upside, it's called startup angel investing, and when it's about downside, it's called contingency planning, right? And that's what this is about.
Yeah. I appreciate you guys adding more shell to the nutshell there. I think incentives completely rule the world. I really despise opinions that think otherwise. I think praying for saints to lead us either on one side of the pond or the other is just ridiculous. Like plan on incentives running the show and think realistically within those bounds. And obviously this might be the biggest incentive puzzle in the history of the species, may very well be our last. I've certainly got my fingers crossed that we can make it, and I'm grateful that we have people who get the problem and have done research well beyond what anybody else has done to try to figure out how to solve for it. So gentlemen, I know that's all we have for time, but I've loved this conversation. It's been a real blast. Thanks so much for being here.
Thanks, Dan.
Dan, thanks so much. It was awesome.
So that's all for this episode of The Trajectory. Thank you so much for tuning in all the way to the end of this episode. I appreciate you being here. And a big thanks to Jeremie and Ed Harris for being able to join us. I will apologize and excuse myself for my enthusiasm throughout this episode. There was so much I was excited to unpack with these folks. Again, having spoken with Jeremie on a number of occasions, this was actually my first time having Ed with Jeremie and kind of going a little bit deeper. And having seen what they've kind of shared on a lighter level with Rogan and read some of their Gladstone work, I was really excited to dive in. I want to talk about a couple of points that stood out to me over the course of this recording. Again, I sincerely believe that these gentlemen have probably the most robust conception of what real politics looks like in terms of AGI as anyone. And I want to highlight some of the points I think are crucial for us to maybe continue to unpack in future episodes, or for other people concerned with getting AGI right to think about. Here we go. One of the big ideas here that we tried to shake out is sort of what to do with the fact that there are Chinese nationals working within all the major Western labs. Again, these are extremely smart people who have earned their right to work at these jobs by merit. Some of them potentially are consciously working at those labs as plants. They know it. They went in that way. That was their intention. I'm sure if there were US people working in the Chinese labs, maybe it would go the same way the other way, although I think we have a little bit less authoritarian control over our researchers than China has over theirs. But as the Harris brothers bring up, grandma might not get her diabetes medication if you don't report on what the latest breakthroughs were from Anthropic, while you're working your job. The fact that we're already sort of penetrated so robustly by Chinese nationals, and that they are, China has an ability to sort of control these folks, is a really sticky issue. And we talked in this episode about sort of what it might look like to unpack that, and that China sort of knows that accusations of racism are enough to kind of make white people, not do anything and maybe continue to have their IP sort of taken away. I'm not even sitting here blaming individual Chinese. I do think, the authoritarian nature of the CCP, I've long been pretty frank, I'm not congenial with. I love me some Chinese history, more than that of almost any other nation on the planet. I love me some Chinese culture. I enjoy being in China, but not a fan of the CCP. But this is not to even blame the people that are working within these labs. China just has leverage over people. And I think the brothers actually bringing up what it might look like to unlock, unravel, and untangle some of those, moles and nodes inside of the bigger Western labs. Very uncomfortable, probably a necessary discourse. As we get closer and closer to the grand crescendo of artificial general intelligence, I suspect we'll have to really wrestle with that. And again, this is nothing against individual Chinese people, but I will say I think as a nation we may have to take that quite seriously. In addition, I think they have a very sort of non-naive look at the state of affairs. I like the approach of fostering as much track two dialogue between past military people, between academic people, between other folks, between the West and China, particularly the US and China. In fact, I encourage that. I've had Yi Zhang on. I've recorded with Dean Zhuilan of Tsinghua University, who's a very, very prominent AGI risk proponent in China, who I respect tremendously, whose ideas are extremely sharp, who's given many a great talk about AGI risk, and who I respect tremendously. And I interviewed him right after Stuart Russell. I want to see as much foster dialogue as we can, but at the same time, expecting cooperation is just something we probably shouldn't do. That's tough. And when the Harris brothers start talking about how we might have to kind of use plausible deniability to sort of shake up the data centers or power efforts within China in order to sort of keep them back from AGI as we sort of race forward, I won't lie, that made me extremely uncomfortable. But I think the fact that coordination is so hard and that we need to think about those approaches seriously, I think the fact that we are there in terms of the present state of realpolitik should be talked about. I didn't like going there. I genuinely didn't enjoy it. I enjoy fostering dialogue, and I hope to be in China more and to foster more dialogue. It's actually really hard to foster dialogue over there for somewhat obvious reasons with the CCP. But I think the fact that they even brought up those approaches and we've had to talk about them seriously should ring alarm bells. And in my opinion, it should drive us in a direction to aim to ardently foster more dialogue, because by golly, mutual sabotage like that sounds abysmal, absolutely abysmal. I felt uncomfortable after the interview, but at the same time, we have to talk about it. So for you, dear listener, dear viewer, what do we do with this? You make sense of it. I mean, let me know. But I think it actually is worthwhile that we air some of the uncomfortable facts, and they did a heck of a lot of that. I think it's also important to note that while they talked a lot about how hard trust is, both of the brothers here, I think, are advocates for track two dialogue, even if they are talking about the approaches that have to happen in addition to that. I think one of the statements from Ed was something like, anything that has any chance of working, we should try. And working means sort of coordinating and ensuring that we don't race towards an uncontrollable, unworthy successor. And I second that perspective. I thought that was very relevant. And one last thing I'll touch on from this particular interview was that, and Jeremie sort of went into this in great detail in the episode. I really like how he unpacked it. I had so much fun in this episode. He talked about how even if somehow China was just like Japan and they turned into Japan overnight, and they were just a democratic partner, even then, we haven't nearly squared what to do with AGI. Something that is as far beyond us in terms of its powers and understanding as we are beyond, a chimpanzee or a Labrador retriever or, a field mouse. It really doesn't seem immediate that this would line up in a brilliant, sparkling way and just go well for humans, regardless. That problem is still to be solved. And Jeremie was pretty frank about it. We solved the China coordination thing. We haven't quite done the whole job. We haven't discerned how this thing will treat us. I suspect it likely won't treat us well, and that we should at least ensure that it can carry the flame of consciousness and of life beyond this planet. But Jeremie rightly stated, solving international coordination is not solving the grand problem of the creative waves, or the waves of creative destruction that are sort of lapping up on the shores right now, farther and farther upon the shore. AGI itself is not solved, even if we solve this coordination issue, which is why I'm continuing to foster our worthy successor discussions and our early AGI experience discussions in the other series that are happening over the course of this podcast and this video series. So had a lot of fun with this episode. I really think sunlight is the best disinfectant. These are uncomfortable topics, but I was glad to have been able to air them, and I hope you enjoyed it as well. We have more good episodes on sort of the U.S. AGI relations topic coming up in future weeks and months, so I hope you'll stay tuned for that, and I look forward to catching you the next time here on The Trajectory.